I have a PhD in economic history, and what I found myself studying mostly was indigenous knowledge systems, how to think indigenously, how to act indigenously, and of course indigenous economic plants and ecosystems. So that's what I do. Well, I always had this curiosity. I was studying Saartjie Baartman, who's a very famous Khoe Khoe ancestor, and I found myself asking questions like, what did she eat? How did she make her clothes? What was her favorite hairstyle? Then I discovered indigenous cosmetics and soaps. And so obviously ideologically for me it was very important because my people, you know, have gone down in the travel writings as these dirty people. And I was like, well, if they made soap, they couldn't have been dirty. Then I had to make it. I was this odd kind of historian that I didn't just want to study pieces of paper. I wanted the actual real thing. And so that's how I got into it. And after 13 years of researching, I said, well, I actually want to grow these plants. And then I bought a hectare in Gordons Bay and started growing them. Once you grow them and you make the products, you've got to figure out a way to reach the public. So here I am. That's what I do. I am in what's otherwise known as the ground zero of colonialism. This is the place where Jan van Riebeeck first planted vegetables. So the castle is obviously very historic because it's where he put his first fortress. But this land is very historic as well because this is literally the first piece of land to be expropriated for commercial production. So it's an astounding story if you look at it from a Khoisan point of view. You know, here was this functioning ecology that produced food and medicine and cosmetics, and he took it all down and replaced it with this very one-dimensional ecology of like European vegetables, European barley, and if you read the diaries, it's fascinating because the poor man is slapped down every time. Like, you know, I planted wheat and the wind slapped it flat. Or, you know, I planted carrots and the drought killed it. Or I planted cabbage and the animals ate it. And so it's a fascinating picture of how unecological that system was from the start. I mean, it was today what we'd call organic, but his very view of nature and how to win prosperity from it was so, you know, so we'd literally be chopping down a food tree to put a cabbage in its place from another ecosystem that had no clue what the Western Cape was like. So there's a sense in which we've come full circle. You know, how do we decolonize? Part of it's got to be about physically retaking the spaces. You know, this is the ground that Kratoa walked, the first woman to translate between the two cultures. Over there is the house where Saartjie Baartman lived when she was in Cape Town. You know, there's history under my feet. So pretty much everybody was using what we'd call natural products. And particularly after the 1880s with the colonization of West Africa, you know, palm oil, you see the beginning of these huge companies like Unilever setting up because suddenly they've got this cheap source of raw material. And then after the Second World War, they needed to continue to find a use for these fossil fuel products. So they said, soap, you know. And so that is why today, every single soap that you'll see in the supermarket or in the pharmacy will be basically fossil fuel based. And so my studies of history, I started asking myself, well, what would I feel like if I'd been born 500 years ago? What would my skin feel like? What would my body feel like? And of course, as a historian, having said that, I had to perform that experiment. I had to say, okay, let me just use traditional products for a while and see, does it change the way I feel about myself? And it did. We often think of decolonization as this incredibly academic exercise. You know, we've got to have seminars and we've got to write books about it and we've got to decolonize our minds. But our mind is part of our body. You know, our mind sits in our body. It functions with our body. It's not like there's a distinction between the two, not from an indigenous perspective. And so I kind of went, what's the point of decolonizing my mind if my body is still colonized? Of course, when I got involved in climate change and started thinking, well, how do I cut carbon emissions? And it seemed to me soap and cosmetics was an obvious place to start to cut our use of fossil fuels. And that's our slogan as a company, you know, saving our skins and the environment one bar of soap at a time, meaning every time somebody buys this and not a fossil fuel soap, we're cutting carbon emissions. So, you know, you can see my customers don't have to understand about climate change. I don't have to explain anything, Greenland, ice, what, you know, parts per million. It really doesn't matter, but they can do something concrete in the moment. You know, I found if you go to people and you scare the hell out of them, like you realize we're facing possible extinction within the next they tune out. The anxiety levels are sky high, they react by denial, they react by various expressions of grief. So my message is trying to be positive. I'm going, you know, you can create jobs, right? You know, you can create an economy of abundance where the more you give, the more it creates. I guess worm farms is the way I think of that, right? You know, take something that nobody has any value for and turn it into something rich. So having said that, I had to prove it. And so here I am, creating jobs and making money and stopping climate change all at once. I couldn't sit in some cushy research job and say, you people do it. That's not how political activism works. I had to go, well, I'm doing it, and very happily so. And that's what changes people, that's what moves people. I think it's the most beautiful thing that's happened since 76. I think it's the most beautiful thing that's happened in the last 40 years. And I think in the same way as the generation of 76 changed the anti-apartheid struggle forever, moved and shifted it in unrecognizable ways, I think this Fridays for the Future, just climate school strike generation has changed climate change activism in such deep and fundamental ways. I think scarcity thinking, the kind of thinking that got us here is, I mean, I'm a trained academic, that's what universities do, right? They school you in a certain dogma. And the assumptions that they make are so deeply rooted in my brain. But I think the advantage the youth has is they're not bound by that. So when I teach them, I go, listen here, you're going to see my limitations. You're going to see the invisible walls in my mind. So can you help me to learn where those walls are? When I see them, I can shift them, but I'm so rooted in that, you know, in that old, the same school of thinking that caused this in the first place, that took away the future of the youth. And I'm not necessarily capable of changing that on my own. So the youth bring not just a new spirit, but they bring a certain freedom of of mind, a certain freedom of thinking that I think we desperately need. And I think the parallel is exactly like with 76. In 76, the established political movements, the ANC, the PAC, the Communist Party, had sort of stuck in a rut. They thought of politics in a certain way. They thought of doing liberation in a certain way. It was all about persuading the system to change. And then the generation of 76 came along and were like, no, we want no part of the system. We're not wanting to fit into that system. We're wanting to demolish the system entirely. And that literally shifted the goalposts for the anti-apartheid struggle and shaped it up until a negotiated settlement in 92, shaped it in deep and fundamental ways. And in the same way, I think this is what the youth is doing now. You know, we have, is it 20 years this year that we have been having COP conversations? You know, kids have been born and finished high school in that time. And they come with this critique. They go, my entire life you've been talking and things have been getting worse. So can you just move over, our parents, and just let us fix this? Yeah, just shut up and, you know, practice a little bit of humility. And this is the climate change movement that I love, the fastest growing social movement of our times. But we had gotten stuck we thought having nice cozy workshops where we preached to the converted and, you know, went to COPs and tried to lobby the system to let us in. But I agree, for 20 years it wasn't working, it wasn't going to work. There's this unstoppable force for change. And that gives me a sense of joy and of hope. You know, we're going to make it through this. If we can get over ourselves, if we can be humble. I mean, these days I say, look, I'm sorry. I'm a little bit like these Germans that worked in concentration camps. I go, I didn't know when I was a youngster and, you know, wanting to buy a car, what I was doing. Now I know. I've got 20 good years left in me. How can I make it up to you? And that fuels my passion. Now, if our movement can come with that sense of humility that, you know what, when they say we owe them something, that really is true. I have emitted carbon far beyond my allowance for this generation. And I need to give thought every time I use the toaster or boil a kettle of water. Am I taking this from my nephews and nieces? And I think the youth is very helpful in teaching us to come with that humility. You know, do I think the world needs another research paper? No. Do I think it needs me sitting out here in the street? Yes. My generation was very fond of producing extremely carbon-emitting pieces of paper. But I think we can move beyond that now. Let's feed the paper to the worms and you know, grow some vegetables. No, I think it's beautiful. I sit here behind Parliament every Friday. I see them in front. Now, they won't let me set up the stall in front. But I love to go say, hey, it's your turn now, you know, and when you need to be clean, come this way. And they do. They walk past, like either to the demonstration or from the demonstration, then you'll get all these beautiful young people taking a turn. And I'm like, you know what? This is the only thing that's going to change the system. Is people saying, forget it. I don't want to be educated for a system that don't exist. I don't want to be sitting in school while you're killing my future. I'm going to take responsibility for my life and I'm going to be out here, you know. And I'm like, I mean, what's not to love, right? I think, and this is good, old, solid, black consciousness theology. I think nothing else is going to change the world but you. The power of taking your liberation in your own hands, of finding the power within you to make a change, nothing can take that away from you. You know, Biko always taught if you allow people to come liberate you, then you're always going to owe them and they're always going to own you. And I think post-94, you know, that has been brought home to us in so many different ways, right? I mean, we were about to you know, bring Russian nuclear power here for $1 trillion. The old struggle promises on which people would try. So the notion of do for self, you know, the notion that if you don't do something for you, it's not going to be healthy for somebody else to come do it for you. It's deep, it's profound. It can take many different forms. You can recycle plastic, you can grow cabbages in your neighborhood, but I think the act of doing something is what is powerful. I mean, quite apart from the practical difference that you make. You can always, nothing has the power to stop you from volunteering at a preschool, go teaching meditation in a prison, and I guess I would pose that question back. I'd go, well, why aren't you doing anything? Like, what's that about? I mean, what your life is so great at present that sitting around feeling sorry for yourself is like the obvious solution. Hello? You know? I guess for my generation, because we came out of the anti-apartheid struggle, so we know that. We know we can change the world through our efforts. You're exactly the same DNA that we are, right? You're exactly the same people. You have, sorry to sound old, but you have a lot of stuff that we never had, like education. So, you know, why shouldn't you be changing the world even more and even better than my generation could even dream of?